The winter night opens on a frozen street corner in Los Angeles at 11:44 p.m. Stars cut through the darkness like diamonds pressed into black velvet. Frost coats the brick walls, the fire escapes, the sidewalk where a child lies motionless against cold stone. Nico Conti kneels on the pavement in front of her. His $8,000 cashmere coat lies discarded 3 feet away, forgotten. The man who controls every criminal enterprise from the ports to the hills sits on his knees like a broken statue, his tailored suit soaking through with ice water and desperation. His hands shake. These are hands that have signed death warrants. Hands that have moved through rooms and watched grown men step aside in fear. Now they shake uselessly at his sides. His daughter Ji-yeon, 8 years old with dark hair and lips turning blue, does not move. Does not breathe. Her small chest is still. Vinny stands frozen 5 feet away, his phone in his hand. Pietro paces the corner, his own phone pressed to his ear, speaking to dispatch in a voice that does not sound like a man who has killed 14 people. She's not breathing. She's not breathing. Where is the ambulance? 7 minutes. They are 7 minutes away. Nico reaches toward his daughter and pulls back. He reaches again. His throat makes a sound like something breaking inside him. Then a woman appears from the darkness. She carries a takeout bag from Riverside Diner, the logo faded from 1,000 deliveries. Her uniform is diner white turning gray from countless shifts, stained with grease that no amount of washing removes. Her shoes are orthopedic, the kind prescribed for women who stand for 16 hours without sitting. The heels are worn completely through. Her name is Cassandra Morgan. She is 28 years old but looks like someone who has lived 40. She drops to her knees without thinking. No hesitation. No fear. No calculation of what this man might be or what might happen next. She simply moves. Her hands find the child's chin. Tilts the head back, opens the airway, her fingers checking inside the mouth for anything blocking breath. She has done this before. Years ago, before everything fell apart, before her daughter Micah was born sick, before the hospital bills started arriving like snow that never stopped falling. She was a nursing student once. She learned this. She remembers. 30 compressions. Her hands pressed down on the small chest with perfect rhythm, counting in her head, her lips moving silently. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. The compressions make a sound like a dull thud against bone. She tilts the child's head. 2 breaths from her own lungs into the small mouth. 2. Then 30 more compressions. Nico watches this stranger save his daughter while he stood paralyzed. While his empire of thousands stood paralyzed. While every criminal organization that answers to him, that fears him, that would start wars for a nod from his head, stood useless. This woman in a diner uniform does what none of them could. At 11:51 p.m., 45 seconds after Cassandra's first breath, the child's chest rises on its own. Ji-yeon gasps. A small, desperate sound like air being pulled back into the world. Her eyes open. Tears stream down her face. Her hands reach out blindly. Cassandra does not leave her. She holds the child steady, her hand on the small back, her voice low and certain. You are breathing. You are safe. You are here. The ambulance arrives with lights that paint the frozen street in red and white. The paramedics move fast, professional, their hands taking over from Cassandra's hands. She steps back, her breath visible in the frozen air, her chest heaving. She does not wait for thanks. She does not wait to be seen. She disappears into the darkness where she came from, leaving only a receipt from the diner that fell from her apron onto the frozen ground. Nico Conti stands in the red light of the ambulance, his daughter breathing in the arms of strangers, his own body shaking from a cold that has nothing to do with the winter. He looks at the place where the woman vanished. His hands clench into fists. Vinny picks up the receipt with 2 fingers, careful not to smudge it. The diner logo. An order number. A delivery address. Nothing more. But what Cassandra Morgan did not know was that Nico Conti never forgets a debt. That the surveillance cameras mounted on the corner of 5th and Montgomery had recorded every second of her face. That by dawn, her identity would be known. That a man who commands thousands of people does not allow a miracle to walk away into the night without a consequence. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a woman with $78 in her pocket came to be delivering food on a frozen night. How she came to be the only person on earth who could save the daughter of the most dangerous man in Los Angeles. How two lives were about to collide in a way that would shatter everything either of them believed about survival, about power, about what it means to be truly helpless. The rain fell earlier that day. Cold November rain that turned the streets of Los Angeles into mirrors. Cassandra Morgan stood at a bus stop at 4:24 in the afternoon, her diner shift finished, her name tag still pinned to her uniform. She wore a sweater underneath the apron, holes in both elbows. The sweater cost $3 at a thrift store. She had owned it for 4 years. In her pocket was $78. This was everything. Not some of her money. All of it. $78 stood between her family and a decision she could not allow herself to think about. $78 had to cover rent, food, medicine, the bus pass, the hospital parking. $78 was supposed to multiply somehow. To become more. To stretch like bread in a Bible story and feed multitudes. It would not. The bus came, wet and steaming. The doors hissed open. Cassandra climbed aboard, her orthopedic shoes clicking against the metal step. The bus driver, a man named Marcus who knew her by sight, did not ask for her pass. He never did. He knew her story. Everyone on this bus knew everyone else's story. The bus route was poverty made visible, corner to corner through the city's broken neighborhoods. 3 blocks from the bus stop stood a hospital. St. Mary's Medical Center. Inside that hospital, on the 4th floor in the cardiac wing, Cassandra's daughter Micah lay in a bed that cost $400 a day just to rent. Micah was 7 years old. Born with a heart that was not quite right. A valve that needed replacing. The surgery was scheduled for 5 days from now. The cost was $300,000. Cassandra did not have $300,000. She did not have $3,000. She did not have $300. $300,000 was a number so large it stopped being real. It became a nightmare instead. It became the thing that woke her at 3 a.m. with her heart pounding, gasping like someone who had forgotten how to breathe. The bus pulled onto 5th Street, past the Riverside Diner where she worked. Through the window, she could see the neon sign flickering. The owner's name was Preston Mercer. He was a man in his 50s with calloused hands and eyes that had watched too many women walk through his doors desperate enough to accept anything. Her manager at the diner. Her landlord's nephew. The man who took her tips every night. Cassandra counted them in her head as the bus moved past. Tips from the breakfast shift, $12. Lunch shift, $16. She had been planning to keep them. She had been planning to add them to the 78. To make 90. To make that number feel less like a cruel joke. But Preston had found the money in her apron pocket at 2 p.m. He had smiled a smile that was not a smile. "You owe me back rent," he had said. Plus interest. The tips were gone. The $78 in her pocket was what remained. The hospital appeared through the rain-streaked window. Cassandra pulled the cord. The bus lurched to a stop. She climbed down and began walking toward the entrance, her shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the gray sky back at her. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed. The smell was antiseptic and desperation mixed together. A woman mopped the floor with water that looked as gray as the sky outside. A man sat in a plastic chair holding his head in his hands. A child cried somewhere in the distance, a sound so small and helpless that Cassandra felt it in her chest like a knife. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor. Room for 17 was at the end of the hallway. Through the window, Cassandra could see her daughter sitting up in the hospital bed, coloring. A nurse's aide sat beside her, a woman named Dorothy who always brought her extra juice boxes because she understood what it meant to love something you could not save. Micah looked up when her mother entered. "Hi, Mommy," she said. Her voice was small. Her skin was pale. The scar from her previous surgery ran like a river down her small chest. Cassandra sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her daughter close, careful of the monitors, the 4 lines, all the machines keeping her alive. Micah smelled like hospital soap and childhood. She smelled like everything worth saving. "How are you feeling, baby?" Cassandra asked. "Tired," Micah said. "When is the surgery?" 5 days. The surgery was 5 days away. The surgery cost $300,000. And in 5 days, Cassandra Morgan still would not have it. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." The words were a lie. But they were also a prayer. They were also the only thing she had left to give. A sound outside made her turn. The rain had stopped. Through the window, she could see the street below. Black cars were pulling up to the curb. 1, 2, 3. Men in dark suits emerged from each one, their movements synchronized like a choreographed dance. Cassandra turned away from the window. She held her daughter and did not let go. What she did not know was that one of those men had just received a photograph. A frozen image from a camera mounted on 5th and Montgomery Street. A woman's face, clear and sharp, caught in the moment of saving a child's life at 11:51 p.m. What she did not know was that her name was already being spoken in rooms she would never enter. What she did not know was that in 48 hours, everything would change. 6 hours earlier, the fluorescent lights of the Riverside Diner hummed their endless, exhausting song. Cassandra Morgan stood at the kitchen counter, her fingers moving through a stack of takeout containers with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. The smell of burnt coffee and grease had soaked so deeply into her apron that no amount of washing could remove it. The fabric itself had become a second skin, stained and permanent, a uniform of her own smallness in the world. Her orthopedic shoes were worn through at the heels. She could feel the concrete of the kitchen floor through the gaps, cold and unforgiving, with every step. Her feet ached in a way that had stopped being pain and become simply the shape of her existence. This was her 3rd consecutive double shift in 4 days. 12 hours yesterday. 12 hours the day before. And today, another 12 stretched ahead of her like a sentence she had already accepted. The back room of the diner was narrow and dim, lit by a single bulb that cast everything in sickly yellow. At 3:22 in the morning the night before, Cassandra had counted her tips on the metal counter, spreading the crumpled bills and coins across the cold surface like a fortune teller reading tea leaves. $127. That was what people had left her. That was what her labor, her feet, her smile, her presence had been worth to the customers of the Riverside Diner on a Tuesday night in November. She had placed the money in a small envelope and hidden it in the zippered pocket of her coat, the same coat she had owned for 7 years, the same coat that no longer kept out the cold. Preston Mercer had found her at 4 in the morning, counting the bills again, unable to stop herself from confirming the number, as if it might have changed through sheer force of hope. He was a man in his 50s with calloused hands and coffee-stained teeth that showed when he smiled. He was always smiling. That was the terrible thing about him. He smiled while he was taking things from you. Service fees, he had said, reaching into the envelope and removing $49 without asking. His hands were rough, the nails bitten to the quick. And you're covering table 6 walkout. They left without paying. That comes out of your pocket too. Cassandra had not argued. Arguing meant termination. Arguing meant a blacklist across every restaurant in the city, every manager knowing her name as the waitress who complained, the one who could not be trusted to accept the simple facts of how things worked. She had said nothing. She had watched him walk away with her money, the bills disappearing into his shirt pocket, and she had calculated what remained. $78. That was what she had left to her name. $78 and 5 days until her daughter's surgery. The calculation had hollowed her out. She had felt it happen in real time, felt herself becoming less solid, less real, the way a candle becomes less wax as it burns. By 7:30 in the morning, she was sitting beside Micah's hospital bed at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. The room smelled like antiseptic and the particular sterility of places designed to keep people alive through machines and science. Micah lay beneath white sheets, her small body making barely a shape beneath them. The monitors beside the bed beeped in their measured, endless rhythm. A red line traced her heartbeat across the screen, a visual representation of the fact that her daughter was still alive. Still, but only barely. Still, but not for long. Dr. Chen had come in at 7:45, and she had delivered the same information she had delivered 3 days ago, and the day before that. The information had not changed. Congenital heart valve defect. The valve Micah had been born with was failing. In 5 days, they would perform emergency surgery to replace it. The surgery cost $300,000. The insurance company had denied the claim because Cassandra's employer did not provide health insurance, and her income was too high to qualify for Medicaid, yet too low to pay for surgery. This was the logic of cruelty disguised as mathematics. The hospital required full payment upfront or they would cancel the surgery. "I know this is difficult," Dr. Chen had said, her voice carrying the kind of practiced sympathy that came from delivering impossible news to impossible situations. She was a good woman, Cassandra believed that. But goodness and powerlessness made a hollow combination. "We have a financial counselor who can discuss payment plans." Payment plans. As if Cassandra could make $300,000 appear across 12 months or 24 months or 60 months. As if her $78 was the seed of something that could grow into that kind of infinity. A debt collector's letter sat on a small table beside Micah's bed, folded and refolded so many times that the creases had begun to tear. The letter was stamped final notice in letters the color of blood. It detailed the foreclosure of her apartment, the eviction proceedings, the accrual of penalties and interest that multiplied faster than her ability to earn. The letter was addressed to Cassandra Marie Morgan and it was very polite about destroying her life. She had not let Micah see it. Micah was 7 years old and intelligent in the way that children of suffering become intelligent. She understood things that 7-year-olds should not understand. She understood that the monitors beside her bed meant something about survival. She understood that her mother's tiredness was not just tiredness but fear, though she would never have used that word. She understood that the world had limits, and she was beginning to understand that those limits applied to her. "Mama, why do you look so tired?" Micah had asked, and her voice had been small and careful, the voice of a child trying not to ask for something she suspected could not be given. "Just a long shift, baby. Rest now." Cassandra had lied, and the lie had been so heavy that she had felt it settle in her chest like a stone. She had kissed the top of her daughter's head, careful of the 4-line running into the back of her hand, careful of all the machinery that was keeping her alive and keeping her imprisoned in this white room. By 4 in the afternoon, she was back at the Riverside Diner. The lunch rush had ended. The dinner rush had not yet begun. This was the dead space between services, and Preston had cornered her near the supply closet with a take-out order in his hand and that smile that did not reach his eyes. "Riverside and 5th," he had said, pressing the order into her hands. "Cold night, better hurry. You got a 15-minute break coming anyway. 2 birds, 1 stone. A 15-minute break." She had worked 12 hours the day before and 12 hours the day before that, and Preston had given her a 15-minute break in each of those shifts. The labor laws said she was entitled to a meal period. Preston had informed her, very quietly, very personally, in a voice like a blade wrapped in ice, that meal periods were a privilege, not a right, and that complaining to the labor board would result in her termination and the filing of a complaint against her for theft of his time. She had taken the order. The bag was warm in her hands. Inside was someone else's dinner, someone else's comfort, paid for with someone else's money. She had put on her coat, the 7-year-old coat that did not keep out the cold, and she had stepped out into the November evening. The air hit her like a shock, sharp and clean compared to the thick grease smell of the kitchen. Her breath came out in white clouds. The street was wet from earlier rain, and the pavement reflected the streetlights like dark glass. Cassandra walked east on Fifth Avenue, her feet aching in her broken shoes, the takeout bag growing heavier with each step, though nothing inside it was changing weight. She did not know that at that exact moment, 3 miles north, a black Mercedes was pulling into the emergency bay of County General Hospital with its lights off and its engine running. She did not know that a child was being carried into that hospital with his small face turning blue. She did not know that a man named Nico Conti, the most powerful crime boss in Los Angeles, was walking behind that child with his fists clenched and his eyes empty of everything except fear. She did not know that in 4 hours and 9 minutes, her life would be cut into before and after. She did not know that she was walking toward the moment that would save her daughter, though she could not possibly know what the cost of that salvation would be. Riverside and Fifth. The intersection was quiet. The wind moved through the empty streets like something alive, like a blade wrapped in ice. A few cars passed, their headlights briefly illuminating the darkness and then leaving it darker than before. Cassandra walked to the building number that matched the order, a small office complex with its windows dark, and she began to climb the stairs to the second floor. The footsteps behind her started at the same moment she reached the landing. She did not turn around. Not at first. She continued to the door marked with the suite number, her hand raised to knock, when the sound became impossible to ignore. Footsteps, yes, but also breathing. Breathing that was not her own, and rapid, and panicked in a way that sent every nerve in her body into sudden, electric attention. Then she heard the sound that changed everything. A child's gasp for air. A sound like drowning happening on dry land. A sound like the world breaking open. Cassandra turned. On the landing below her, a small boy was collapsing, his body folding in on itself like a marionette with its strings cut. His skin was turning a color that should not exist in nature, a color that meant the oxygen was leaving his blood. His hands were clawing at his own chest, trying to open it, trying to make room for air that would not come. 8 years old. Dark eyes wide with terror. Asthma attack. The diagnosis was immediate and certain in her mind because she had watched her own daughter fight for breath before she had learned to use the inhaler correctly. Cassandra dropped the takeout bag. The food spilled across the landing. She was moving before conscious thought caught up with her. She was on her knees beside the boy, her hands already lifting his shirt, her fingers finding his ribs, her voice cutting through the silence of the stairwell, calling for help, for anyone, for God, for mercy. She did not think about liability. She did not think about whether she had the right to touch this child. She did not think about anything except that this child was dying, and she was the only witness, and her hand still remembered what to do. Her hand remembered CPR. She had learned it 7 years ago, before Micah was born, at a hospital volunteer training program that she had quit because it did not pay. The training had lodged itself in her body anyway, had lived in her muscle memory, waiting for a moment exactly like this. She tilted the boy's head back. She opened his airway. She began compressions, the heel of her hand pressing down on his small chest with a force that felt like violence but which was actually the only language that death understood. Come on, baby, come on, breathe for me, that's it, come on. The compressions continued. 100 beats per minute, the rhythm burned into her from training. Her own breath ragged. The boy's body small and fragile beneath her hands. Around them, the November night stood perfectly still, holding its breath, waiting to see if a stranger in a grease-stained apron could pull a child back from the edge of the dark. The hospital room was so quiet you could hear the machines breathing for the child who could not. Nico Conti sat motionless in a leather chair, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the window where Los Angeles spread itself like a carpet of diamonds below. 6'2", dark hair silvered at the temples, his tailored charcoal suit cost more than Cassandra Morgan earned in 4 months. His hands rested on his thighs, palms open, as if he had forgotten how to make fists. On the hospital bed, his daughter Gian slept beneath white sheets, her small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a child returned from the edge. The doctor had left an hour ago with words like stable, no permanent damage, incredibly fortunate. But Nico was not thinking about words. He was thinking about a door in his mansion, locked for 20 years, a door he would not open. Behind it sat a wooden crib with the name Sarah carved into the headboard by his own hands when he was a different man, a man who believed that wealth could protect everything. Sarah had been stillborn. His wife had left him 3 days after the funeral. He had buried them both in silence and built an empire so large, so untouchable, that he would never be helpless again. Tonight, a stranger in a grease-stained apron had done what his empire could not. The door opened. Vinny entered, early 30s, muscular frame moving with practiced silence, suit dark as the night outside. His face carried the flat expression of a man who delivered information and nothing else. He held a file. Thin manila, the kind that contained everything. The woman, Vinny said. Her name is Cassandra Morgan. Nico did not look at him. His eyes remained on his daughter. She is 29 years old. Single mother. Works double shifts at Riverside Diner on 6th Street. Lives in a one-bedroom apartment in the East Side, which is deteriorating rapidly. Her monthly rent is $1,100. Her daughter's name is Micah. Age 7. Congenital heart valve deficiency. Something in Nico's chest moved like a blade through ice. Surgery, Vinny continued, his voice steady, is scheduled for 4 days from now. Cost is $300,000. Insurance has denied coverage. The hospital issued a final notice yesterday. Without payment by the deadline, the surgery will be cancelled. Nico closed his eyes. She has $78 to her name, Vinny said. We tracked her bank account. This is not a woman with secret resources. She is truly this poor. Also, her employer, a man named Preston Mercer, steals from her wages. Systematically. We confirmed it through the security footage. He takes her tips. She earns approximately $17 per shift in tips if nothing is stolen, which is never the case. She is losing between $45 and $60 per week to theft. Nico opened his eyes. He looked at his sleeping daughter. Then he turned to face Vinny. Her daughter, Nico said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. She will have her surgery. All of it. Paid. Completely. No questions about insurance or payment plans. Call the hospital administrator. Do it now. Vinny nodded and left without requiring clarification. In 15 years of working for Nico Conti, he had learned that when his boss made a decision in that particular tone, the decision was already written into the fabric of reality. Alone again, Nico stood and walked to the crib where Ji-Yun slept. He reached out and placed his palm against her forehead, feeling her warmth, the small miracle of her breathing. He thought of the stranger's hands pressing on his daughter's chest with the force of someone refusing to let death win. He thought of his own hands, which had been clenched into fists for so long that they had forgotten their shape. At that same hour, Cassandra sat in her car in the parking lot of the diner, her hands trembling against the steering wheel. It was 1:51 a.m. She had 3 hours before her shift started again. 3 hours to sleep, to rest her aching feet, to exist in the small space of her one-bedroom apartment where Micah slept on a twin mattress and Cassandra slept on a futon that had seen better decades. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost did not answer. Miss Morgan? A woman's voice, professional, warm. This is Dr. Chen calling from Children's Hospital. Cassandra's stomach seized. Is she okay? Your daughter is perfectly healthy as far as we know. I'm calling about her upcoming surgery. There has been a development. A significant one. The silence stretched. Ms. Morgan, your daughter's surgical costs have been paid. In full. $300,000. The payment cleared an hour ago. An anonymous donor. The surgery is confirmed. Cassandra could not breathe. She could not speak. She could not do anything except sit in her car while the city lights reflected on her windshield and the wind moved through the parking lot like something alive and terrible. "Miss Morgan? Are you there?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'm here. Do you know who made this payment?" "No," Cassandra said. "No, I don't know anyone with that kind of money." Dr. Chen paused. "Well, someone does know you. Your daughter will have her surgery, and she will have her life. I thought you would want to know tonight, so you could sleep knowing that part was decided." The call ended. Cassandra sat in her car until the sky began to lighten, until the first edges of dawn touched the Los Angeles skyline. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 15 years ago. Instead, she sat with her hands on the steering wheel and felt something shift inside her, some small piece of hope that had been locked away, trying to survive on stale air. She did not know that this moment of relief was the last peaceful breath she would take. 3 days later, at 2:06 p.m., Cassandra wiped the counter at Riverside Diner while the lunch crowd thinned. Preston Mercer watched from the kitchen doorway, his frame thick with age and soft living, his eye small and calculating as a cornered rat. A woman sat at the corner booth. She was older, early 50s, her grey hair arranged in a style that cost money every 6 weeks. Designer suit. Hands with expensive nails. This was Margaret Harrington, owner of the Harrington Hotel Group, and her presence in Cassandra's workplace was not accidental. Preston nodded at Margaret. Margaret nodded back. At 3:15 p.m., Cassandra's shift ended. As she moved toward the back exit, Preston called out, "Morgan. Office. Now." The office was cramped, decorated with expired health permits and invoices going back years. Preston sat behind his desk, which was actually a folding card table he had spray-painted brown. Margaret stood beside him, regarding Cassandra with the expression of someone observing something she had found stuck to her shoe. "Sit," Preston said. Cassandra did not sit. "I know someone gave you money," Preston said. "A lot of money. $300,000. I want to know who." "That's my business," Cassandra said quietly. Margaret's smile was thin and sharp as a letter opener. "It became our business when you accepted money from a man connected to organized crime, Ms. Morgan. We've done some investigating. Nico Conti runs half the underworld in this city. His financial records are dirty. Very dirty. And now you're entangled with him." Cassandra's face went white. "Here is what happens next," Margaret continued, stepping forward. "You will sign a statement stating that Nico Conti coerced you into accepting illegal funds. You will cooperate fully with an investigation. And you will resign from this job, forfeiting all back wages." "And if I don't?" Cassandra's voice was barely audible. Preston's smile widened. "Then we file a report with the police stating that you've been stealing from the register. We have documentation. Margaret also sits on the hospital board, and she will ensure that Micah's surgery is cancelled for accepting tainted funds. You'll be arrested. Your daughter will go into child services." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The sound of dishes rattling came from the kitchen. "You have until tomorrow morning," Margaret said. 9 a.m. "Think carefully, Ms. Morgan. Some choices cannot be unmade." They left her standing in the office. Cassandra sat down slowly on the folding chair and felt the world collapse into smaller and smaller pieces. That evening, at 7:45 p.m., Cassandra sat across from Nico Conti in his private restaurant, a place where the walls were cream-colored and the lighting was low and gold, and the air smelled like rosemary and expensive wine. This was not the restaurant where he had brought her before. This was somewhere deeper, somewhere more private. "They threatened to cancel Micah's surgery," Cassandra said, her voice shaking. "They threatened me with arrest. They want me to testify against you. They said if I don't cooperate, I'll lose my daughter." Nico listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, and something dark moved across his face like a storm cloud across water. "Preston Mercer," he said slowly, "has been stealing from waitresses for 7 years. Margaret Harrington sits on 3 city boards through bribery and blackmail. They are predators dressed in the language of authority." "What are you going to do?" Cassandra asked. "What I should have done the moment I learned your name," Nico said. His eyes met hers. "I am going to make them understand that some people are not powerless. And that includes you." Outside, the November rain fell against the windows like fingers tapping, waiting for the door to open. The sound carried with it the sense that everything was about to change, that the quiet moment they inhabited was ending, that consequences were gathering on the street outside like an army preparing to advance. Cassandra Morgan did not know that by morning, the entire structure of her suffering would begin to collapse. She did not know that a man she barely understood had decided that his power meant nothing unless it could be used to protect her. She did not know that the locked door in his mansion, the one he had not opened in 20 years, was about to be opened by something stronger than he was, the possibility of saving someone before it was too late. She only knew that the rain outside sounded like the end of something and the beginning of something else, and that tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., she would walk into Preston Mercer's office and give her answer. But her answer would not be the one they were expecting. The holding cell at County Detention Center smells like metal and despair, a sharp blend of disinfectant that cannot quite mask the human wreckage soaked into every corner. The concrete walls stretch up from a floor stained with things Cassandra does not want to identify. A single fluorescent light hums overhead with a sound like a trapped wasp, buzzing, never stopping. She sits on the metal bench bolted to the wall, her hands still trembling, her fingernails torn where she gripped the bars during booking. 11:47 in the morning. 2 hours since the police came to her apartment. 2 hours since Micah screamed. She closes her eyes, but all she sees is her daughter's face, the way her small body went rigid when the officers snapped the handcuffs around Cassandra's wrists, the way Micah's voice cracked into a pitch Cassandra had never heard before. A social services worker named Patricia had knelt down to Micah's level, speaking in that practiced, gentle voice that social workers use to manipulate frightened children into believing separation is temporary, is nothing, is fine. Cassandra knows better. Once the child enters the system does not return them quickly. The surgery is in 36 hours. The note from the surgeon was clear: the valve replacement cannot be delayed. Every day the defective heart works without the corrective surgery is a day closer to catastrophic failure. Cassandra calculated the probabilities the way she calculates tips in the quiet hours before dawn. The odds of surviving the waiting list as a ward of the state, the odds of finding a hospital that will operate on a foster child without parental consent, the odds of being released in time to authorize the procedure. All of them were 0. She thinks of the final notice letter, the one she has read so many times she can feel it creasing in her mind. She thinks of Preston Mercer's office, the way he counts the stolen tips with one hand while typing payroll adjustments with the other, skimming money from every shift she works. She thinks of Margaret Harrington's voice on the phone with the hospital administrator, cool and assured, "Ms. Morgan is not creditworthy. We require full payment upfront or we cannot schedule the procedure." She thinks of the moment Margaret's words had struck Cassandra like a blade wrapped in ice. The panic rises again, climbing her throat like a small animal clawing for escape. Her breath comes in short gasps. The fluorescent light above her head pulses in and out of focus. She grips the edge of the bench. The metal is cold. Everything in this place is cold. Then she thinks of Nico Conti's expression the night before, the way something shifted across his face when she told him about the arrests, the way his hand covered hers across the table as if he could press reassurance directly into her palm. She thinks of his voice, deep and solid like an oath, "I will handle this." She takes one shaking breath. Then another. She decides to trust a man she has known for 3 weeks, a man whose world is built on things she does not understand and does not want to understand. She decides because the alternative is to surrender, and Cassandra Morgan has not surrendered yet. She does not know that at that exact moment, Nico Conti is making phone calls that will dismantle everything Preston Mercer and Margaret Harrington have built. Across the city, in a downtown office on the 42nd floor of a building that costs more to heat for one winter than Cassandra earns in 10 years, Nico sits behind a desk made of marble and dark wood. The morning light cuts through the floor-to-ceiling windows at an angle that makes everything look like it exists in a dream, edges sharp but somehow unreal. His phone screen glows with a single message: Cassandra Morgan arrested 8:14 a.m. Charges: theft, fraud, embezzlement. Bail set at $25,000. He reads the message once. His face does not change. No one watching him would know that something inside him has shattered, because Nico learned long ago to keep destruction behind his eyes. Vinny enters without knocking, the way he has entered Nico's office for 14 years. He is a thick man, mid-50s, with grey threading through his dark hair and a scar running from his left temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from a dispute that ended with 5 men hospitalized and 1 permanently disabled. He stops when he sees Nico's expression. "The Morgan situation," Nico says. "Not a question." "She's in holding downtown," Vinny confirms. Preston Mercer filed the charges. Margaret Harrington corroborated. They move fast. Nico's hand closes around his phone. They made a mistake. Get Cassandra out. Bail. Charges dropped, whatever it takes. Make it happen in the next hour. His voice remains even, conversational, but Vinny has heard that particular tone exactly 3 times before, and each time it preceded something that required a week to clean up. Already on it, Vinny says. "I have Antonelli making calls to the DA's office. The charges are bullshit. Mercer has a record of falsifying employee files going back 7 years." "Good." Nico leans back in his chair. The leather creaks. Outside, the city moves below them like an organism they do not belong to. Make a second call. To Pietro. Tell him I want Preston Mercer and Margaret Harrington brought to the warehouse on 7th. Tonight. 9 p.m. Vinny nods slowly. He has worked for Nico Conti for 14 years, and in that time he has learned that questions are unnecessary. Nico does not explain himself. He acts, and the world adjusts to accommodate his actions. The child? Vinny asks. Will be returned to her mother, Nico says. Before the surgery. At 10 minutes past 1 in the afternoon, a lawyer named David Antonelli walks into the holding cell where Cassandra sits in the exact same position she has occupied for hours, as if moving might somehow make the situation worse. He is a small man, 62 years old, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car used to cost before the transmission failed and she sold it for scrap. His tie is the color of old money. "Ms. Morgan, I'm David Antonelli. I've been retained on your behalf." He shows her papers, documents stamped with official seals. "The charges against you have been dropped. The DA determined that the evidence was inadequate and that the primary witnesses have credibility issues. You're free to go." Cassandra stares at him. She does not trust this. Charges do not disappear in 4 hours. Evidence does not become inadequate between morning and afternoon. The system does not work this way for women like her. "Who hired you?" she asks. "I represent a client who prefers to remain unnamed at this time," Antonelli says, which is the lawyer's way of saying Nico Conti. "However, you should know that there is a second matter. Your daughter, Micah, has been released from state custody to foster care pending investigation. That investigation will conclude by end of business today with a recommendation for immediate return to your parental custody." Cassandra's hand goes to her mouth. The sound that comes from her is not quite a word, something closer to a prayer spoken by someone who stopped believing in prayer 5 years ago. "There is also this matter," Antonelli continues, sliding a folder across the table. Inside is a hospital authorization form, and on the line marked responsible party is Cassandra's name, and in the box marked financial guarantee is a single number, $300,000, paid in full. The room tilts. Cassandra reaches for the chair to steady herself. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Antonelli says gently. "You'll want to go home. Your daughter is waiting for you." At 8:45 that evening, in a warehouse on 7th Avenue that has stood empty for 3 years, Pietro brings Preston Mercer through a side entrance. Preston is a man in his 50s with soft hands and a gambling habit that has hollowed out his face, leaving him with the appearance of someone who has been slowly dissolving from the inside. His shirt is stained with sweat. His eyes are wide. He sees Nico standing in the center of the warehouse, lit by a single overhead light that leaves his face half in shadow. Beside Nico stand Vinny and 3 other men whose names Preston does not know and does not want to know. What is this? Preston's voice cracks on the second word. Nico steps toward him slowly, each footfall echoing in the empty space. You made a mistake. You believe that a woman who works for you is powerless. You believe that stealing from her, threatening her child, manipulating her into desperate situations was something you could do without consequence. He pauses 2 feet away from Preston. You threatened someone under my protection. Preston's legs give out. He drops to his knees, trembling like a cornered animal. His mouth opens and closes. I didn't know. I didn't know she was connected. Please, I'll drop the charges, I'll return the money, The charges were already dropped, Vinny says flatly. And the money has been accounted for. $47,230, stolen in increments of $5 to $20 over 7 years from women you deemed powerless. Pietro grabs Preston by the collar and drags him toward the van waiting outside. Preston's shoes scrape against the concrete floor, leaving trails like a wounded animal being pulled toward inevitable suffering. Where are you taking me? Preston gasps. Vinny leans close to him, his scarred face inches from Preston's terrified one. You're not going to die, Mercer. Death is too merciful. You're going to federal prison. 40 years for organized labor fraud, theft conspiracy, and racketeering. You're going to spend those 40 years remembering that you could have simply paid what you owed, and you chose to steal instead. Meanwhile, at Margaret Harrington's penthouse on Wilshire Boulevard, the knock on her door comes at exactly 10 p.m. She opens it in her silk robe, expecting her doctor, expecting anything but the federal badges the man in the suit produces with the casual authority of someone carrying the weight of law enforcement. Margaret Harrington, you're under arrest for labor board corruption, bribery of public officials, fraud, and racketeering. She tries to close the door. The agent's hand prevents her. Her penthouse, the one that cost $3 million, becomes a crime scene in real time. Agents move through her rooms photographing documents, seizing computers, opening the safe hidden behind the portrait of her late mother. This is absurd, Margaret says, her voice still carrying the edge of someone who has never been told no. I have lawyers. I have? You have 18 months of recorded transactions, the lead agent interrupts. 12 witnesses. And a cooperation agreement from Preston Mercer, who gave you up in exchange for a reduced sentence. Margaret's world shatters like glass dropped from a great height. She does not understand at first. Then she does. Then she understands too completely, the way someone understanding comes when all possible exits have been sealed. By midnight, the news is breaking. By sunrise, every news outlet in Los Angeles is reporting the scandal. By noon, Margaret Harrington's name is poison. 35 years federal prison for racketeering. Her hotel empire seized. Her board positions revoked. Her society friends, the ones who called her darling and invited her to galas, suddenly have no memory of who she is. In his office, Nico watches the news feeds without expression. Vinny stands beside him, and when Vinny finally speaks, his voice carries something like awe. What now? Vinny asks. Nico does not answer immediately. He is thinking of the locked room in his mansion, the one that has remained sealed for 20 years since his daughter, his little girl, was delivered stillborn at 7 months, purple and silent and forever untouched by the world. He is thinking of how Cassandra Morgan saw a boy collapse on a frozen street and did not hesitate to place her hands on his small chest and push life back into him. He is thinking of the way Micah wrapped her small arms around Cassandra's neck in the hospital waiting room this morning, whispering over and over, "You came back." You came back. Justice has been delivered, Nico says finally. Preston Mercer will spend the next 40 years in a cell, watching through the window as the world moves forward without him. Margaret Harrington will lose everything she valued, not her life, but something worse. Her legacy. Her freedom. Her name erased from the social register. Their assets will be seized and distributed to the employees they victimized. They will have nothing, just as they tried to leave Cassandra with nothing. Outside the office windows, the city glitters in the darkness, light scattered across the landscape like stars fallen to earth. In a hospital room, Cassandra Morgan sits beside her daughter's bed, holding her small hand. In 3 hours, they will take Micah to surgery. In 8 hours, a new heart valve will be beating inside her daughter's chest, and Cassandra will be waiting when she wakes. None of this would have happened if she had not seen a boy collapsing on a frozen street. None of this would have happened if she had not believed that some people are worth saving, even when you have nothing left to give. The warehouse was silent except for the sound of waves lapping against the pier posts below, and the rain outside had stopped, leaving only the smell of salt water and rust hanging in the air like a curse that could not be erased. Cassandra Morgan stood motionless in the darkness, her 2 bags at her feet, Micah's small hand trembling in hers, when she heard the footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. The sound of a man who did not need to rush because the world moved at his pace. Nico Conti emerged from the shadows like a blade cutting through fog. His coat, cashmere and worth more than a year of her old rent, billowed in the cold wind that swept through the broken windows. His face was raw with emotion she had never seen before, the kind of vulnerability that powerful men hide from the world, and in that moment he was not the crime boss who had dismantled an empire to protect her. He was just a man terrified of losing someone again. Cassandra, he said, and her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. How did you? I read your letter. Every word. The way your hand shook as you wrote. The tears that fell on the paper. His voice was thick, breaking at the edges. I came to stop you. Tears streamed down her face now, hot and unstoppable. You can't. I have to go. For Micah? For Ji-Yun? For you? Nico stepped closer, and the warehouse seemed to shrink around them. 20 years ago, I lost my daughter Sarah. She was delivered at 7 months, purple and silent, and she never took a single breath. I built her a nursery and I sealed it, kept it locked like a shrine to my own helplessness. I thought if I gained enough power, controlled enough of this city, commanded enough loyalty, I could never be helpless again. He paused, his jaw clenching. But 3 nights ago, my son collapsed on a frozen street, and he stopped breathing. And I was helpless. Completely, utterly helpless. Micah looked up at Cassandra, confused, squeezing her hand tighter. You saved him when I could not, Nico continued, his dark eyes glistening. You placed your hands on his chest and you gave him back his life. And now you think I will let you walk away into danger because you are afraid of mine. Your enemies will come for me, Cassandra sobbed. They will come for my daughter. I cannot risk her. I cannot risk either of them. My enemies will find only ghosts, Nico said, and there was steel in his voice now, the blade returning. Every rival who might think of targeting you will be reminded, systematically and without mercy, that you are under my protection. I will station men outside your door. I will monitor every threat. I will burn through half of what I own if it means keeping you safe. Not because I owe you. He moved closer until he was directly in front of her, his hands reaching for her face, thumbs brushing away her tears. Because I choose to. Because losing you now would be losing someone again, and I cannot survive that. I will not survive that. Cassandra's breath came in broken gasps. You don't have to. Yes, I do, he whispered. And then Nico Conti, the man who made empires bow and who commanded loyalty through fear, knelt before her on the concrete floor of an abandoned warehouse at midnight. He knelt like a supplicant, like a man surrendering his armor, his knees hitting the ground with a sound like thunder. Stay, he said. Please stay. Let me be your protection. Let me be your family. Not because of obligation. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and irreversible. Cassandra collapsed to her knees, and their foreheads touched, their breathing synchronized, her whispered yes barely audible over the waves crashing against the pier below. Micah, 7 years old and wise beyond her years, wrapped her small arms around them both, and in that darkness they held each other, 3 broken people becoming whole, 2 wounded souls learning that some people do not leave when the storm arrives. 6 months later, the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and amber as it descended toward the horizon. Cassandra Morgan stood in her new office on the 23rd floor of a glass building in downtown Los Angeles, looking out over the city she had once feared. Her title was embossed on her door, Executive Director, Conti Foundation for Medical Relief. Her salary was enough to provide stability without ever compromising her dignity. Her desk held no debt collector's letters. No final notices. No reminders of desperation. The foundation she directed had already helped 847 families cover medical expenses they could never have paid alone. Children received surgeries. Parents received treatment. Cassandra had become the person she had always wished existed when she was counting $78 in tips at 3 in the morning, wondering how she would keep her daughter alive. In Nico's garden on the terrace of his mansion, the one that had once felt like a fortress of solitude, Micah and Ji-Yun played together in the late afternoon light, their laughter echoing across the manicured lawn like music. The girls were painting flowers on canvas, their small hands covered in bright colors, their joy unguarded and pure. Vinny and Pietro stood nearby, no longer just lieutenants but uncles, their expression soft as they watched the children work. In 15 years of serving Nico Conti, they had never imagined they would be sitting on a terrace watching 2 little girls paint, but here they were, and something in their chests felt less hard, less cold. Cassandra and Nico sat together on a stone bench, his hand covering hers, their fingers intertwined. The setting sun caught the small diamond on her ring finger, not an engagement ring, but a promise ring, placed there 3 months ago during a quiet moment on this same terrace. She wore it without fear now. The nursery was painted today, Nico said quietly. The one that was sealed. Cassandra turned to look at him. What color did you choose? The girls chose. A soft yellow, like sunlight. They wanted a place where they could come and read and draw. His voice carried none of the hardness it once held. Sarah's crib is still there, but now it is surrounded by new things. Toys that belong to living children. Books with pages that bend from being read. It feels less like a tomb now. That is healing, Cassandra said, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. No, Nico corrected, his arm drawing her closer. You are healing. You were always the healing. I just had to learn to accept it. The police had released their statement 2 weeks after Margaret Harrington's arrest. Preston Mercer had been sentenced to 40 years in federal prison on multiple counts of wage theft, systematic fraud, and conspiracy with Margaret Harrington to commit extortion. The charges had been airtight, documented and irrefutable. Margaret faced 16 years, her name erased from every social register, her charitable foundation dissolved, her assets seized and distributed to the employees she had victimized. She would spend her 60s in a cell, forgotten by the society that had once celebrated her name. The debt collector's letter-stamped final notice sat framed on Cassandra's desk now, not as a reminder of despair but as evidence of survival. She had kept it deliberately, a visual proof that she had walked through the valley of the shadow and emerged on the other side. When the sun finally dipped below the city line, painting everything in shades of purple and blue, Nico and Cassandra stood together. The children called to them from the garden, their voices bright and eager. Micah and Ji-Yun ran toward them, their small bodies moving with the unself-conscious joy that belongs only to children who have never known real loss. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives, Nico said, and he meant it with every rebuilt piece of his heart. Cassandra smiled and kissed his cheek, and together they walked toward the laughter, toward the light, toward the future that had seemed impossible on a frozen street corner 387 days ago. The storm had passed. The rain had stopped. And what remained was only warmth, only shelter, only the simple miracle of people who had learned to protect each other. If this story moved your heart, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone you love, someone who needs to remember that protection and trust can come from the most unexpected places. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow we have another story that will leave you breathless. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Cassandra and Nico's journey. We read every single one, and your words matter to us. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Remember this, the greatest power is not control but the courage to choose to stay when the world tells you to run. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.